All right, and welcome to Liticast. We are here today joined by Jared Correa, who is actually our very first repeat guest here at Litify. So welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting. Although the music is new, I was digging that. That was really great.
We've upped our game since your last visit.
Very impressive, and in short order too. Well, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it. Really enjoy talking to you guys.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for coming on. So I'll introduce myself briefly for a moment. Dove Slansky. I'm the Vice President of Solution Engineering here at Litify, one of the founding members of the company, and I pitch in as host here on occasion. Jared and I have spent a bit of time talking about some of the work that he's been done, and excited to go a bit more in depth with him here today. And Jared, I'll let you, reintroduce yourself for the folks who don't know you.
Yes. Thanks, Dove. I appreciate it. So my name is Jared Correa, and I do two things, roughly. I am a business management consultant for law firms across the globe. I do that for independent law firms and also for bar associations as well. So I help lawyers with business management. But I've also started a chatbot company with a partner of mine. That product is called Gideon, and we're going to talk more about chatbots today. So yeah, thanks for having me. Really looking forward to it.
And I'm impressed you do two things, because I usually can't handle more than one. So
I never said I did two things well, but I do two things.
All right. And bonus points. We have a love of James Taylor here in the chat today. So bonus points if anybody wants to bring that up in our discussion today.
Please hit me up with James Taylor stuff. I can go deep back catalog. I promise you.
Oh, that's dangerous.
There's not a song I don't know.
Let's keep it on the front wall. For those in the comments, let's keep it to his A-list material. All right. So, Jared, I guess, like you mentioned, we're going to be talking about chatbots today. And I think it's probably useful to start off with really an overview of what a chatbot actually is, right? I know the terminology itself is somewhat self-explanatory, but let's discuss what a chatbot is. And then we'll get into some I guess, of the more well-known use cases, and then we'll drive that towards legal a little bit.
Right. So I think the best way to describe a chatbot is just like a messaging tool for mostly law firm websites, but they can exist in other places as well, right? So it allows legal consumers to come in, ostensibly talk to law firms, but the difference between a chatbot and a live chat service is the chatbot is totally automated. So it's essentially a machine rather than a person, which has a lot of amplifying. It amplifies a lot of effects. So, for example, like law firms aren't going to have to pay as much for a chatbot because they're not staffed by people, right? But the idea behind it is that it's really two things are happening. One is that you can engage leads more effectively. So studies show that, like, if a legal consumer comes to a website and they're engaged by the website in some fashion, like there's some kind of conversation that takes place, even if that's a non-human driven conversation, that means that lead is far less likely to go to another law firm before they talk to you. So
we're saying that that's fascinating to me. So we're saying that even if and it's known that they're sort of conversing with the computer, which is its own mind warp in its own way, but even if they know they're conversing with the computer, just the fact that there's some level of engagement coming from them that is stickier than if they simply just filled out, a contact us form.
Totally. And statistically, this has been shown that the contact forms usually go into the ether, right? And law firms are not good about responding to those. So a contact form only works if somebody replies to the person who's filled out the contact form. Same thing for an email, same thing for a phone call. And lawyers are not great about returning phone calls. They're not great about responding to emails immediately. And on the other side, legal consumers want fast responses. So 85% of legal consumers want to hear back from a law firm within 24 hours of contacting them. And many want speedier returns than that. So what a bot does is it engages users. They can do something like schedule an appointment, have a conversation with somebody, get some information back from the bot, and then they're not going to go to the other law firm. That 90% of the time, they stick with that appointment before they go to the next law firm. So that doesn't guarantee that you're going to convert the lead, but what it does is it gives you the first bite of the apple before somebody else gets it. And that's super important.
And fascinating, quite frankly, right? So I spent a lot of my career at law firms working a lot on the intake side.
Right.
So those contact forms were a way of life for us. And, again, we could talk about the technology that is behind those. The firms that do it better are the ones that leverage that technology, right? So instead of when you come to the website and you fill out that contact form, what many people don't know is that often just generates an email to someone. And as you mentioned, right, emails are terrible, right? They get lost in the ether. We're talking about shared mailboxes.
Nobody likes email.
Yeah, we're talking about competing priorities. When an email comes in and a phone call comes, the email is going to get ignored. When an email comes in and then a second email comes in, the first one gets lost. People don't necessarily realize that, right? But the firms that do it well, the firms that are taking those contact forms and automatically, usually via an API, right, like Litify has, putting them into either CRM or their case management system so they can deal with them appropriately. Yeah. But a chatbot takes that to the next level, right? Instead of that one-sided communication of prospective client to the law firm, they're now engaged, right? And the statistics, which I haven't seen them, but they make perfect sense to me because when I used to work with firms and working with clients who would reach out, our goal was always somewhere in the order of minutes to reply back to them with a phone call.
Right,
of minutes, so that you actually have a dialogue going. And if you can do that with humans, we would win. So chatbots take that to the next level because it's essentially instant.
Right. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I appreciate your comments completely because I live in that world also. And may I just say in the chat, I know that Megan McKay is not a chatbot. She really just loves James Taylor. Let me just get that out there. Okay. In terms of like the chatbots, so I think law firm intake for a long time has been about like making it easier for the law firms, right? So the back end is supposed to be easy, simple for lawyers to use. And I think for too long, law firms has not been like consumer centric. And it shows. Like a few years ago, their study came out that said the average law firm NPS score or net promoter score was like 25, which was on par with airlines and cable companies. So that shows you how consumers feel about law firms.
Right where you want to be. For all those of you familiar with these South Park cable company episodes, that's right where you want to be.
You don't want legal consumers being like, man, my law firm is just like Comcast. That's great. That's the last position you want to be in. So what these bots do is like, they put more frontline information out there to the consumers. So the consumer doesn't know the machinations that are happening on the back end of a law firm, but this gives them idea of, okay, I've got some information now. I have an appointment scheduled. I've been able to get some information back. I've engaged in a conversation. So now I'm going to wait until I can actually have a further conversation with this law firm before I go call 10 others. And that's really what it's about. And if law firms are just consumer centric a little bit more than they are now, just taking that first step, that's going to guarantee them more conversations with leads. And as I said, it gives you the first bite at the apple. So it's also going to give you more opportunities to actually convert leads.
Yeah, the bar is actually unsurprisingly low.
Super low.
For law firms.
Yes.
And what you referenced, right, that lawyers are not great at returning phone calls, again, down that they're out of the NPS score easily. And by far, the number one source of complaints at a law firm is my, lawyer, right, paralegal or whoever it is. My lawyer did not return my call. Easily the number one source of complaints to a law firm. So anything that is used to improve that communication, we could talk about it in the lead context, which I think is important because that's the first touch with a law firm, right? That first impression, but it can be leveraged really throughout their relationship with the firm, a way to just communicate and get information from them. So let's start with the lead context. I think that's the most important. I think that's where if anybody out there has actually come in contact with a chatbot, they've probably come in contact with it in either of two scenarios, is my guess. One is sort of the lead scenario. So if you're trying to contact some sort of company, even outside legal, right? Some sort of company, you want information on their services or their product, you may have gotten hit by a chatbot. Or in a customer service, way where you're going, you want to help warranty something and you're going to chat with the company and you're getting asked them. I've encountered many chatbots. Many of them are abysmal, right? It's just an endless loop of nonsensical questions. But some of them are actually really, really fantastic. Like it actually, you can almost forget that there's not a person on the line, and the key is the response is usually too instant for a person to have typed it.
Right.
But you can almost forget that there's not a person there because the response is actually helpful, right? The logic behind it is fantastic. So let's talk about this at the for the the lead capture process for a law firm. I'd love to hear you talk. Generally, but also specifically about Gideon and how you can leverage that to not just necessarily produce more leads, but also close more leads. And I think that's an important part.
No, it's funny that you mentioned your experience with chatbots because I've had the same experience. Like I'm like 40 something years old, right? Like I prefer to communicate with a chat system. Like I don't want to talk.
I'm younger than you for a moment. Okay, go on.
Good. Excellent. And then we're in a position where now, there's been some discussion out there that like in the next couple of years, like 9 out of 10 consumers are going to prefer talking to a brand via a messaging system first before they talk to anybody. And that bears itself out in my life, at least. Whenever I have a customer service issue, I want to talk to a bot before a person because it's instantaneous. And you're right about the response time, by the way. It's funny you mentioned that, like, because a little bit of this is uncanny valley, right? You know you're not talking to a human, and you know they're giving you super speedy responses that are based on a script of some kind. So one of the things we've worked on actually is to make that a little less jarring for consumers. So we've experimented with different response times, right? 1.5 seconds, 1 second, 1.2 seconds, 2 seconds, just to make it more like it's speaking to a human. Not trying to fool anybody necessarily, but make it a more accurate.
There's a whole body of work there, right? Which is around like people who have an Alexa or a Siri, why you feel the need to address them like they're a person.
Right.
Like you actually carry on a conversation. You don't just simply bark orders and they don't have feelings, right? You can just tell them what to do, but the average person goes through this sort of long-winded conversation to get to that point, even though you know it's not a person.
Yeah, unless you're my children who are super mean to Alexa for some reason. They hate Alexa. Yeah, but there's so many ramifications of how you design a chatbot. But in terms of conversion, right? Because this is the other thing. Like, you want to get leads, but you also want to convert the leads. The biggest thing for me is like a next step, right? Because consumers come into the law firm environment. They have no idea what that's like for the most part. And many consumers are coming into the law firm environment for the first time. They don't know what a lawyer does. They don't know what the legal process looks like. That's some of their biggest questions that they're going to have. So if you can walk them down to a next stage, that's helpful. So in our bots, what we do is we provide two options. So we'll give them a notification, right? So we'll say, hey, you've completed this conversation. Somebody at the law firm will get back to you. We'll send that same message to the lawyer. But we find that like the biggest thing is like converting to a calendar appointment of some kind. So we lead people down a classification trail, and we'll talk about that as well, I'm sure. Once they're classified, they can then schedule an appointment with a lawyer or with a staff person. And again, if consumers are able to do that, they're not going to bounce and go to another law firm.
That's tremendous.
In terms of conversion, if you get that calendar appointment in place, you have a very high likelihood of securing that lead. So it's engagement in the first instance when they actually have a conversation with somebody or something. And then at the next level, it's converting via a calendar appointment or a specific next step of some kind. Because that's what, if you produce a contact form as a law firm, the lawyer gets some update, but the client gets nothing. They've just thrown a contact form into the ether. They have no clue what's happening after that.
Right. At best, they're getting an email confirmation. Thank you for submitting.
Right. Yeah. That's it. But they don't know anything else. So if you can provide them like an appointment and they say, hey, like, I'm actually going to talk to a lawyer about this next week, then they settle down. They're less frustrated. They're less concerned. And that's how you convert people at a higher rate. And that's what we try to push people to.
It's funny. It's sort of sales 101, but converted to chatbots, right? Sales 101, right? If you're talking to a prospect, you never get off the phone, right? All sales courses will teach you the same thing. Never leave the conversation without a next step, right? So whatever that might be, right? And again, I love how that's sort of the sales mantra, which in real life doesn't always happen that way, but you're always taught, right? Don't leave without a next step. So if we're looking at, let's say, an intake department for a law firm, right? The ideal scenario, and I've worked with so many law firms over the years to really sort of counsel them and help them in this way, which is once you have that person on the phone, you don't want to get off the phone unless you have a client, right? Yes. Do whatever you can do to make them a client, or in a very important scenario here, give them the appearance they're a client before you get off the phone. Right. So what does that mean? It means if you have them, and this is when we can relate this directly, as you're saying, to a chatbot. If you have them on the phone, maybe I'm going to try to sign them to a contract while I have them on the phone, or at the very least, provide them enough assurance that I'm working on the case so that they don't go and hire somebody else.
Right.
Sending that now to a chatbot, which is book an appointment with them directly through it so that they understand that someone is already working on their behalf. And that's how you close that gap. If you have them on the phone or if you have them in the middle of a chat conversation, it doesn't matter that there's not an actual person on the other end of the line. The bot is designed to make sure you don't lose them without turning them into a client.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I see that we got a question in the chat. Can I respond to that? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, let's call it out.
Sean is asking, how do you gauge which response time is most effective in a bot? That's a great question. So we're actually still testing it. We're trying out different responses with different law firms and just seeing which works better. So in terms of what's best, right? We do some surveys with consumers, right, about like how they perceive the bot conversation. Was it too fast? Was it too slow? And then on the firm side, in terms of the bots that we're pushing out there, we see like, how long does it take somebody to complete a question? How many people actually finish the conversation? How many people book a meeting? So we track statistics like that and try to make sure that we're moving these things forward in the most efficient way. So at a very granular level, and then in an entire conversation level. So as far as I'm concerned, that's still an open question. We're still testing it, but that's kind of how we're doing it. We want to do it from the consumer side and also from the lawyer side. So thanks for letting me do that. I just saw that pop up.
No, that's fantastic. I think it's important to call out, again, we're dealing with a scenario where people are not used to. They're not used to the fact that they're having a conversation with a machine.
Right,
so,
right.
And this brings us back to the old skeuomorphism discussion, right? Which, for those of you who are not familiar, right?
That's what? No.
Right. For those who are not familiar, that's where you have a digital or a virtual representation of something that doesn't have to look like the real thing, but you make it look like the real thing. So for those who are longtime iPhone users, for example, you may remember that in the original version of the iPhone, when you took a picture, an actual shutter closed on the screen. There is no shutter in your iPhone, right? Yes. there is no aperture. That's nothing. It's completely digital. But Apple put it there because it made people more comfortable. It gave them, the feeling that they were taking a picture. Yeah. Conversing with a chatbot, I think today is probably somewhat similar, right? You kind of know there's not a human there, but the more in which we can make it feel like it's why Siri and Alexa have names, right? So you don't just say, hey, and talk to them. It's why they have a name. You feel like it. I think that's important that, in terms of getting people comfortable with using them, because I think that's a barrier as well. And I'd love to hear you talk about some of the adoption issues over here, which you can deploy a chatbot all day, but you got to get people to want to use it. And how do you help drive that adoption?
No, that's a great point. And there are certain things that we do to make it like, again, we're not trying to fool people. We're not trying to make them think this is a human. But even if people know they're talking to a bot, they want like human-like responses and a human-type experience. So we do two things, really. So one thing is that we adjust the speed of response time to make people feel like they're talking to a human, right? We'll have an avatar on the side of each conversation, which says, this is your part of the conversation. This is either the bot you're talking to or a human you talk to. If a human joins the conversation, that tends to make people feel more comfortable. The other thing we do is we also brand it very specifically for the law firms. And that orients people in the fact that like, okay, not only am I having this conversation, but I'm having this conversation with an agent of this law firm. So I feel secure and protected in that fashion too. So we allow people to choose a color scheme that matches their website. We allow people to upload their own logo. We allow people to name the bot, whatever they want to name it. We allow people to add their firm name at the top. All that stuff, I think, orients people into, okay, this is a regular conversation. It's not entirely not weird, but it's less weird than I thought. And as we talked about, like some people are really comfortable using bots already, and you don't necessarily have to convert them. But for those people who aren't, you need to make it look a little bit more like a traditional conversation. We were on the phone with somebody today, and they're like, "Can I have the bot be named after my dog Rex?" And we were like, "Sure, why not? If that's what you want to do." Some people have named the bot after me naturally. So, yeah, I think you're right. People are actually going after these like almost like natural type conversations in the context of an online script. So it's a fascinating place to be working in, honestly.
Yeah, I know we've bounced around a bit, but I want to continue this theme. So now that we have them engaged, right, the next step is to keep them engaged, right? Yeah. So I would imagine, because I know that I've heard this even about using electronic signatures from law firms, right, where I try to explain the benefit of using something like a DocuSign or another e-signature tool, and the law firm say, well, no, we prefer to handle it personally. There's a personal component to it. Obviously, COVID has completely thrown that out the window. So
right.
Anybody who thinks that was necessary to their business, if you're still signing up cases, congratulations, you now know it's not necessary to your business. That's been proven. But I've been telling firms for years, like, listen, I know you want to have that touch. There's time for that. But right now, speed is what's important, speed and accuracy. Getting them something, talking them through it, and using, electronic, and a lot of firms would push back on it. So curious to hear you talk, now that you have engagement, right? It's branded, we have engagement. How far can you actually get someone through a chatbot? And that question is actually double-sided. It's technically speaking, how far can the chatbot go? And B, how far do you often see people getting through it?
Yeah, the answer is pretty far. But let me just say one thing I forgot the last time, and then I'll dive into that, which is like, One thing we've been really heavily focused on is like creating natural language conversations for people. So one of the issues that lawyers have, if you ask them to design a chatbot script, is it's going to be super obtuse to a regular human, right? Like a layman.
Don't ask lawyers to do that.
Yeah, person. no one knows what a tort is, right? No one knows what personal injury is necessarily. It's an injury. Is it personal? I guess it's personal to me. You don't want people thinking about that. So we try to create scripts that are as close as possible to like natural language that people would use. And I think that's really important in terms of engagement. So we strive to do that constantly. Now, in terms of how far a bot can go, like pretty damn far. So like you can book appointments, you can get notifications back and forth, but you can go all the way up to the client conversion period and even beyond that if you wanted to. So at the client conversion level, you can have people sign documents through a chat. You can have people complete disclaimers through a chat. You can have people, you can get flagged for a conflict check via a chat. You can have people sign fee agreements. You can have people make payments. So all the way up to and including this person is now a client of the firm. That can be done via the context of a chat. And kind of the way we launch these bots is that like they're not single sessions, right? So if I'm a client, I go back to the website, like that conversation fast forwards to where I was before. So if a client now says one of the features that we're building out is like, hey, I have a question for the lawyer, we can make it so that we recognize that that person is now a client. They are going back to the lawyer or the firm and saying, I have a question, I want a status update. And we could accommodate that through a bot as well. So theoretically, a bot could exist through like the entire client lifecycle and even afterwards as well.
And what you're saying is it's actually the same bot. I know that sounds weird. There's
yes. No, you're right. Yeah.
But it's the same bot, meaning their conversation is not disjointed. They don't have to repeat themselves. They, the bot is smart enough to know that they're a client and who they need to be talking to and why.
Right. So when you're coming into the firm, it's not just like, hey, welcome to the firm again. It knows who you are, right? And so if you were a past client, theoretically, you could come back after your case is closed and say, hey, I have a new matter, and it could start the process over again for intake. Or you could even say I have a referral, and that could start the referral process as well. So they're really flexible, really extensible, can connect with anything, super easy to use. And there's applications across like the whole client lifecycle. Now, full disclosure, we're a relatively new company. We haven't built all this out yet, but it's on the roadmap and we're working on it at a very high rate of speed.
That's absolutely incredible, right? To be able to get documents signed in that context means that, right? And yes, I agree with you. Don't ask lawyers to write these things out. It's the lawyer. I say I'm allowed to say I am one. Lawyers are the worst. I tell everybody they are the worst. But don't ask them to write out your chatbot scripts. It's not going to go well. You're going to have about the same level of understanding as if they actually spoke to the lawyer.
Right. So we write them. We do playbooks like your personal injury attorney. Here you go. Don't even think about it.
Exactly. Similar to like talking to Comcast. Nobody leaves happy. Sorry, Comcast. It's true.
No one from Comcast is listening, right?
I would hope not. Or maybe I hope they are. So the scripts are one part, right? To be able to say the right things and engage them, but to be able to keep them and hold them engaged to the point where you're comfortable having a document signed. And I don't mean comfortable in that there's security around whether they actually signed it, but comfortable that they're qualified, right? They've been put into the proper bucket. We've essentially screened their case well enough without a person getting involved that I'm okay creating this contractual relationship with the client. That's a fascinating point to me, right? Because most of the chatbots that I've seen, or the way at least I think about them, they're useful for the first part of the process. Capturing information, perhaps getting some of the screening done, but at some point we're going to need a person to get involved. But for you to say that we don't actually need that person involved, you can get them all the way through becoming a client, is fascinating.
Yeah, no, this is a great point that you make, which is like there are different stages of intake. And I'm very clear on this when we talk to people. So like in an initial point of view, right, you want a client coming to the website and you want them to book an appointment. That's what you want them to do. And you don't want to make that super cumbersome. Yep. So what we tell people is like, look, build this out so it's 7 to 10 basic questions, right? And make it natural language. And then what we found, interestingly enough, is like if we start a conversation with people and we're just asking them for contact information right away, they'll drop. What they want to do is be able to tell their story, right? So what we often say is like,
hey, good old fashioned, can I get your number in case you get disconnected? No, you can't. Answer my question first. first, right?
Right. So like we'll tell people like what issue are you experiencing or like what's happening right now in your life or whatever it is. They'll respond to that. And then we say, okay, we'll get you connected with the right person. What's your name? What's your contact info? That's been really effective. And then we have various series of questions that we use, question types, multiple choice, drop downs, input a number, do a date picker, whatever it is. We got a bunch of those. And then every question answer could conceivably have a tag or a label, right? And I'll just run down a basic example. Like if it's a personal injury case, right? You want to know whether it was a motor vehicle accident or a slip and fall. If it's a slip and fall, you want to know where it took place, right? Once you know where it took place, you want to know what injury happened, right? You want to know whether there was a police report. We collect all that information and we tag it. So if somebody submits a police report, we say police report on this case. If somebody says they were injured at a supermarket, we say supermarket. If they say they hurt their leg, we say leg, that kind of thing. And then what we do is we build out these labels and tags into classifications. So we'll collect them together and we'll put whatever number of tags you want, 5, 10, 20, 15, into a classification. And then we know that person is like a personal injury client, slip and fall, grocery store, hurt their leg. We can gather as much information as we want. And you can do that through any legal context, right? You can do that as an estate planning attorney. You do that as a bankruptcy attorney. And then you know that they hit a certain classification. And then the good thing about using classifications is you don't have tire kickers in the first instance. Yep. And in the second instance, you're pushing people down automations and workflows. So if somebody is a qualified lead, they can book an appointment. If they're a so-so lead, they can get a notification that somebody will call them back. If they're a bad lead, then you can put up a message that essentially says, hey, we're not engaging with you, but here's how you can get help. Just functionally like a non-engagement letter that a law firm would send, but delivered through a bot framework.
Yeah, and I'll carry that to the next step and pick up a question that was just posted, which is how these chatbot conversations are integrated into Litify. The good news is it's coming soon.
Yes,
not yet.
I'm working on it.
Jared and I have been talking a lot, even outside of this Liticast, about how to actually accomplish that. So that is underway. And the idea is that you just mentioned, right? Imagine that scenario where it's a so-so, so we put them into sort of a pending bucket, or it's a not great lead, so we have to turn them down, give them that turn down letter. The fact that you can then integrate this into your system, into your practice management platform, right? Now what happens is now you have a tremendous wealth of information you've captured, and you didn't have to pay someone a salary to do it, right? You know who the people are. The ones that are pending need more information. They can get routed to people to follow up on them. The ones that aren't qualified just become part of your database for remarketing purposes, right? You have their information. If you want to go out and send them an email or a text or whatever they might be, provided you're opted in, you now have the ability to talk to them. So you're creating data to use in your, and it's not just a person's name, right? You know what they talked to you about, you know what bucket they came in, you know where they're from, you know all this information, so you can really start to target people specifically.
Right, exactly. And so that's just the first stage of interaction, which is so crazy because you can collect all that data up front. And then we're working on like applying that data in different ways. That's coming down the pipe as well. But then as you spoke about before, there's like that second stage of intake, right? Which is you want to ask people more specific questions. So I know, for example, like in many different practice areas, you get people on the phone, you get a phone consultation, then you're like, now fill out our intake form, our real intake form. And what happens at some law firms is like somebody comes out from behind the door and there's a 600-page form sitting in front of you, and now you're stuck in somebody's lobby. So what we can do is also create those intake forms, that second level intake form, those really long intake forms, publish them online so that you don't have to have somebody sit in your office and fill out a form, right? You can do it at home if you want to on your smartphone. You can do it on the ride back from the lawyer's office. You don't even have to go into the lawyer's office, period. And then you collect all that data. And the advantage of it is that even though that's like a 200, 300 question series, potentially, like you can continue to use tags, you can continue to use labels, and you continue to classify people at that level as well. So utilizing that as a second level of intake is really helpful. And then as we talked about, once people are clients, now they're able to potentially access status updates about their case in a convenient mechanism or medium that they're already familiar with using.
I have so many questions. Good ones, right? Just because this to me is fascinating, right? The ability to do this kind of work where law firms traditionally have held off hiring, right? A lot of law firms have only a couple people working in because they just don't want to expend the manpower to go ahead and do these kinds of things. The fact we can do them digitally is great.
It's like the Matrix, man.
Exactly. We're getting a couple more questions here in the chat about, actually modifying them and having a person sort of jump into the conversation. So, Jared, I guess specifically, if you could address it and how Gideon handles it, right? I know everybody handles it differently.
Yeah, everybody handles it.
You guys have put a lot of work into the back end to make it simple, right? That drag and drop, that low code interface. Litify preaches the same thing about our system and why it's so great to use. But if you could talk a little bit about how you handle just the nature of building or editing these chatbots and the ability for, if you do need a human to override or jump in, what that looks like.
Right. So in the first instance, like we looked at development shops that were designing chatbots for law firms, and that didn't look like a scalable model, right? Because if you need to add an apostrophe, you go to the dev shop and they're like, okay, we'll charge you $150. We'll add the apostrophe, right? So what we did was we essentially built like a no-code bot builder. So like I said, we try to launch the chats to start with. We're like, here's the ones you can use. We'll build that for you. And then editing it is like Microsoft Word, right? You click on the specific bot you want to edit, and then you click on the question and you just type and you save. Like it's that easy.
Right. The bot builder in some ways is actually the more important part of this, right? Because you could commission someone to build you a bot. But like you said, any change you make requires a dev effort. But your bot builder that allows the firms to really go ahead and dial this in really on demand, and that's when you get some clear power. When a new lawsuit starts, or you have to change criteria, or you want to put a new one on a new web page, right? You can create these very quickly and deploy them.
Right. So if you can edit existing bots really easily, just like I said, just type and save, but you could also create new campaigns. Like you got a new PI campaign that you want to run, right? For specific states on a specific topic, you can build it in like 10 minutes, probably. All you do is click the new question, type it, save it. That's it, literally. It's super easy to do.
That's fantastic.
We spend a lot of time on that. You're right, because like that's going to be the drawback if lawyers can't use it easily. So.
Right, we hear that claim about a lot of things, right? When we're and just again from Litify's perspective, and this is sort of sales 101, right? When we're talking about Litify, a lot of customers say, "Well, I can do some of those things, or the things that you can do," and a lot of our responses agreed, right? We didn't necessarily reinvent the wheel, but the fact that only one person knows how, and they have to write code or some sort of query, or go to or go to get like professional, support help to do this, as opposed to just a couple of clicks and you could produce it. That's a very different experience. Another further question, right? So we talked about leads, going through the process, perhaps even qualifying them. And we touched on briefly what happens if someone's going through and it's either a so-so lead or maybe it's a more complicated lead, right? Mm-hmm. Or the person is getting frustrated with their engagement, right? Is there an escape lever they can pull? Is there a hatch they can go down to get to a person? Or I guess, can a person jump in? And what does that look like for a person to actually get involved?
Yeah, so we're building this out further, but there's some NLP or natural language processing in the bot where if somebody says like, I want to stop this conversation, I need to talk to a human, we're looking for those types of words or phrases. So at that point, we can stop the conversation and then say, we'll have somebody from the law firm get back to you. And then we notify the firm that says somebody was in the chat, they want to talk to a human, and we can route it that way. Like that's.
I wish I had that experience the other day. I actually was using a chatbot, and I just wanted one simple question answered, and I was stuck in a loop of, I'll be happy to get someone to help you if you can only give me your name and phone number. And I said, well, I just really have a question, right? It was a very simple yes or no question about a product's abilities, and they only wanted, and I was just stuck. That's chatbot hell, right? I couldn't get out. I couldn't get a person. There was no escape hatch to pull to get out. So
super frustrating to channel switch, and also super frustrating to not get your question answered. So like at the least we can do is say, if you want to talk to a human, we can deliver that. And in relation to this conversation, and I know Tiffany is asking this in the community in the live stream as well, is like we are building out, and this is going to come out in the next quarter or two. Don't kill me if it doesn't come out in the next quarter. We're calling it hybrid live chat.
He promised it.
Oh, son of a gun. Okay, we're calling it hybrid live chat. So the way it's going to work is like we've got all these notifications in place, right? So we can tell an attorney that a lead is hot, but we can do that before they go down the entire route of scheduling an appointment. So what we're building is an attorney can have the ability to get notified once people hit a certain number of criteria. Maybe that's 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. And then the attorney or the staff person gets notified and it says, hey, you've got a lead that's hit this qualification. You can now jump in and take over the chat as a live person, or we can continue to do the automated chat. So now they're not dealing with tire kickers. They know that this person has 1, 2, or 3 issues that they're looking for, and then they take over the chat, the avatar changes, and then they can go ahead and convert the client however they wish on their own. That's coming out very soon.
It's such a great experience you offer, right? Because at that point, that inflection that the customer reached, which is, I've been okay with a chatbot, but I'm no longer okay, right? Whether it's just simple frustration or it's an important question, or it's a sensitive question. We'll get into some security and sensitivity stuff in a moment. But when they reach that point, if you don't have a way to change, I mean, literally change the conversation, right?
Literally, yeah.
A way to literally change the conversation, that's where you have a drop off, right? That's where the person bounces and leaves. That's where they get frustrated and they go, and you know what happens when they get to the next law firm page? They're going to pick up the phone and call them because they no longer want that experience, right?
Exactly.
And you sort of had a chance and you blew it. So that ability to get in and that hybrid way of getting someone involved, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, and incidentally, the other thing I'll say is like that other criteria you laid out, like somebody just wants to talk to a human. We could also ping a staff person at the law firm that says somebody wants to talk to a human. They won't get back to you later. They now have the opportunity to get back to you now. So then you're in that live chat world where you say waiting for an agent kind of thing. But the advantage that we're trying to play off of is that like when you use live chat, you're hiring a staff essentially of other people to manage that from end to end. This allows you to only use it when somebody has been qualified, and it allows you to use your staff for that purpose, not outside agency you have to pay more for.
Yeah. I mean, the scale here is fantastic, right? And that's super important. I want to touch about some other stuff, which is a little bit of the sort of ethical considerations, perhaps, when we're talking about a chatbot with a law firm, right? I don't believe you probably have to get into this, but I'm sure you've thought about it, right? What about attorney-client?
I'll talk ethics all day, my friend. I'm good with that.
Right. What about ethical considerations, right? Advice from a non-lawyer, has that come up? Is a robot practicing law? I'm sure we're going to see a lawsuit about that and above the law one day as well. We'll read about someone who filed that lawsuit that they're suing the robot that practiced law without a license. But I imagine there could be some ethical considerations with client confidentiality and that stuff.
There are, and just a little bit more on my background. I work with lawyers, but I'm also an attorney myself, as you are. So
so you know that the lawyers are the worst. Exactly.
Yeah, I understand. I'm the worst myself.
Everybody but us knows it. It's amazing.
So I'm a lawyer. I've worked with lawyers. I've also worked with ethics boards significantly in the past. Let me just quickly say that there's a website called Attorney at Work out there. And a friend of mine, Mark Palmer, who works for the Illinois Ethics Agency, he just wrote an article on chatbots like last week and all the ethical pieces of it. And I talked to him about that article. But here are the major pieces of it. Like the first thing you talked about, like attorney-client privilege, right? That's key. So I think a lot of people worry about the solicitation side of it, but it's a little bit different than your standard solicitation because it's much like a website, right? Like websites are not solicitation because someone is coming to that website and asking for information.
Right, you have to get to the site to get the chatbot. The chatbot doesn't just show up on your computer.
Right, exactly. So it's the same thing. So you're not being solicited by the chatbot. You've landed there, you're looking for information, and you're utilizing whatever engagement mechanism exists on the website. So that's fine. The other piece of it is attorney-client privilege, right? So you need to be able to create a disclaimer of some kind that says, hey, just by using this means of communication, this does not mean that we're representing you. And by the way, you can also add, if you want to, like, don't send us confidential information. Just book an appointment now, and we'll get to that later. So what we actually just came out with a couple of weeks ago was the ability to add a disclaimer to a bot. And so the way it works is the law firm could add any disclaimer they want. It actually pops out of the bot, so it's more visible. And then somebody has to agree to that or not before they can move forward. So you have to agree to this. Cool. Yeah. And then also there's like an audit trail. So now there's like a record that somebody agreed to this disclaimer, even if they don't engage you. And then on the back end, as I talked about, like the process here is disclaimer, engagement, or non-engagement. Those are the two paths that you can go down. So for the non-engagement side, we kick off a message for that as well. And now you've got an audit trail within the chatbot that says, we've got a disclaimer, we've decided not to engage with this firm or with this client, or we've got a disclaimer and we've decided to engage with them. And potentially, like, here's also the engagement agreement. So that can all be
audit trail is super, super important, right? You have to make sure you have that one for a number
totally.
Of reasons.
Yes.
Whether or not you're signing the client up or turning them down, that audit trail is super important. Okay.
Want to talk more ethics? I'm good.
No one wants to talk more ethics, that's for sure. No one has ever answered that question with a yes. Come on. Even the ethics professors, well, actually, they probably answer it with a yes. But outside of them,
right, they're the only ones.
Outside of them, right, you mostly just get snoring from people.
Right.
Okay. I want to touch a little bit about some of the other players in the market space, right? If you're using a chatbot like Gideon, right, you have to be using it. You have to be using it with something else, right? You can't just have a chatbot; it's got to go someplace, right? So when someone is looking to deploy a chatbot, what are some of the things they should look for as far as integrations or other things, abilities? What are some of the things that they should be looking for out of their chat provider?
Right. Yeah. There's actually a number of things that you should look for. So one of the things that I tell lawyers to look for is like more conversions, right? So you want to test it and see if it actually converts. You want to talk to the provider about how they do in terms of conversion. So one thing that is still unclear to a lot of lawyers is that like a chatbot is not necessarily going to derive more leads for you, right? So chatbot companies are not going out and managing your marketing, right? You're still getting the same amount of leads. That depends on what you do to market your firm. The idea is you want to convert more of those leads. So you want to ask about that. The other thing, which we talked about before, is like, what does the UI look like for consumers? So how easy is it to use? But also, what does the UI look for law firms? Like, how easy is it to change the bots? Are there legal
builder, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the bot builder. Like, are there legal specific features within the tool that you can use? Because there's chat bots out there that are not legal specific. So whoever you choose to work with, I would work with a legal specific company.
At least someone who knows the industry, right? Because you could use a chatbot, but if you're not getting the benefit of those pre-written scripts or the knowledge of how law firms or legal consumers work, you're dealing with a regular sales scenario, and it's not exactly the same.
No, it's not. It's not essentially a match for what lawyers need. I mean, I talk about this all the time. Is that one of the reasons I do consulting, I create products for lawyers, is because lawyers have a very specific use case and need. And part of that is based on ethical requirements, and part of that is based on the nature of their business. And it helps to have somebody who knows that. Some of the other things I look for is cost and pricing, right? Like I've actually seen companies that charge by the number of website hits, not even that go to a bot, right? So that total number of website hits, which I think is really unfair to attorneys. But the major pricing component for these bots, live chat as well, is per lead, per conversation. We don't charge that way. We charge on a user basis. So lawyers can have like a flat fee for what they're looking for in terms of pricing. So it's only going to depend on how many seats you need, not on how many leads or conversations you have. From our end, at least, the challenge about charging via lead or conversation is not all those are going to be good leads. Some of them are going to be junk leads. And we don't want to be charging people for that.
You also sort of penalize the firm for their success, right? If they drive a lot of traffic, then I know you're paying for it and you're getting the service, but in some respect, you're getting penalized for success because I'm using it more. They're not stressing the server more that they're paying.
Totally. Yeah. And that we had many conversations about that. Is like, why should I, as a law firm who's paying a lot of money on lead generation, have to essentially pay you a portion of that? Because those are the leads that I've created. I totally get that, and we're trying to be sensitive to that. So that's why
it's like a tax.
Yeah. We don't want to apply a tax to like your marketing. You already pay enough for marketing, right?
Exactly. All right, last comment here from the Rothenberg Law Firm, a great firm of ours in the Philly area. That's a great point, right? Their chatbot is able to run during Shabbat, and they're not. So fantastic, yes. Right? That's, when they're not in the office and they're not working, the chatbot can pick up the slack for them, which is another great use case for a chatbot.
Yeah.
All right, Jared, this conversation, as you can probably tell, I could go for days, and I know you can too as well. But we'll spare the audience here of you and I just continuing to nerd out over this for a couple.
We'll talk some other time, yeah.
But I want to thank you. I guess one chance to wrap up again, remind people, what you're building and how to get in touch with you and sort of the value behind it. And obviously, Jared and I have been talking extensively about plugging, his company Gideon into Litify, so that how we can enable our customer base, his customer base, to more seamlessly use each other's technology. But Jared, I want to thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. It's always a great conversation here with you, whether we're on the technology side or on the consulting side. It's always a great conversation with you. I know we had some great interaction from the audience today as well. So hopefully we answered some questions and certainly gave people some things to think about. And I'll let you sort of wrap up with people and how they can find you.
Sure. Yeah. What I would do is, if you want to check it out, we're happy to run folks through a demo. We just came out of beta on this product about a month ago. It's really fully featured already. So if you go to gideon.legal, that's GIDEON.legal, schedule a demo. And if you mention that you were in the Liticast Live, we'll give you $50 off the first month.
All right. There you go. There you go. A great promotion from the folks at Gideon. Jared, thank you again for coming. To everybody who watched, you'll be able to find the recording of this hosted on our page along with a write-up on it. For other episodes, feel free to visit us at litify.com/Liticast. You'll find them on LinkedIn as well. You'll find them in our YouTube channel. And we look forward to more episodes next week. Jared, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dove. Take it easy.
Alrighty.